Hello and welcome to the second video here on my channel about software development. And yeah, as I lined out in the last video, the first project I want to work on is about some web design where I want to transform my old homepage into a bit more modern homepage. And for this, I need to basically start using a build system. And yeah, if you haven't seen my last video, I recommend to check it out because I give all the details of what I want to do, of some requirements I have for this project. And yeah, in this video now, we're gonna dive in. We start with some practical work here. So as a little outline for that video, I will set up the build system. So basically using npm to install Gulp and then setting up a first script to do very simple tasks just to see as a proof of concept that it works. And yeah, I'll explain a bit how I do that. And as a requirement, maybe you should be roughly familiar with JavaScript and HTML, so I'll not go into the details about that. I'll focus solely on setting up the build system and the environment for further developments I want to do with my homepage. Yeah, so let's just start with that. So first, let's quickly talk about the setup here. I'm in Visual Studio Code. Here you have my homepage already in the dist folder, which is what we're gonna change as already outlined in the first video. But first of all, I want to quickly show you how I set up this command line here, which uses the Git Bash. So if you installed Git for Windows, which I guess you should because we all want version control when we develop software, what you also get is the Git Bash, and you can set it up here in Visual Studio Code. This bash allows me to use Linux-style commands, and I can be a bit more productive, even though I'm not a pro when it comes to command line. But yeah, I like to use it more than the Windows command lines. So to set it up in Visual Studio Code, press Ctrl-Shift-P, and this brings up the command shell here. And in it, you just type select default shell. And with this, you get now the drop-down of the available shells. So you have the typical PowerShell, which you get with Windows 10, the normal command prompt, and down here is the Git Bash. And this is what I've selected. And when it comes up, you also get those colors, and you can now type something like ls to give me the files in this folder. So the next thing we have to do now is make sure that Node.js is installed. So it's possible that you already have it, so just press Node-V. And I have already version 10.15, which is not the latest version, but yeah, don't bother now to update it. This version is enough for me, but if you have no Node installed here, make sure to install it, because aside from providing you with the Node.js runtime and everything, it also allows you to use npm to install loads of npm packages, which will help you be more productive because you don't have to write everything from scratch. And for one thing, Gulp, which we want to use, and also Nunjucks are npm packages. And yeah, with Node, we now have access to all of those. And yeah, what you can do after installing, you see when I press here npm-v, it also gives me the version of the npm. Yeah, and as I already said, npm opens up lots of possibilities because you can install all those npm packages, which doesn't mean you should always get an npm package. Sometimes it's good to just code something yourself, but for more complex tasks, it's usually good to first browse if you find a package for it. And also when you find a package for anything, it's good to check how many downloads it has. If it's currently used, also check the corresponding Git repository for this npm package, and check if there are known defects and how defects are dealt with, so if it's maintained, to make sure that you don't just install something which is no longer maintained, which has maybe security issues and stuff. So yeah, be a bit careful, but if you find an npm package which is used very widely, chances are it's also maintained. So to be able to install npm packages and get access, we first need to initialize it. So our project needs to be initialized with the call npm init. And since this is just a local project, which I don't plan to upload, I'll just leave everything here as default, so I don't give any version information and stuff. Just let everything as default. And now what you recognize here on the side, there's a package.json which also contains all the information I just inserted. So if you plan to write a real npm package which you also want to publish, make sure to insert the correct information here. Also the license might be important for you, but yeah, this is nothing I'll upload, so that's not so important. The important thing is just the fact that I have this package.json now, which will now track all the installed packages. So as I've already said, Gulp is the first package I want to install to give me the build system, and I'm here on the npm package page, and you see here on the right side weekly downloads 31,000. That's a good sign, so it's still widely used. Also, for some use cases you might be interested to check the license of an npm package. For me that's not so important. Also MIT is usually a very open license, but if you want to build your own npm packages and publish them and release them under license, and you also use npm packages, you might also check what their license is and if it agrees with your license or with your use case. So this is something you want to check sometimes, read up on. Also here, as I already said, there's the GitHub page for Gulp, and I've gone to the issues. That's usually something you can check. So there are quite a few issues open for Gulp, but as I said, it's a widely used project. So if you're really into it, if you want to make sure that it's safe to use, you could now check the issues and see if they're relevant for your use case. Also, what you can always check is how actively maintained it is. So here we have the docs were updated, but all the rest, there's not so much going on, which doesn't necessarily mean that's bad, so it's not maintained. It could also mean that the project has reached a stage where it's quite stable and there's no need for many updates. So do your research, do a bit of Google, check who uses it and if there are some things which might be problematic. And also in the future, if you decide to use some package, you might want to track it a bit and see how it changes over time if there are problems. Now let's proceed with the installation of Gulp, and there are two things we need. For one thing, there's the Gulp CLI which we need to install. So npm install is usually the command you use to install an npm package. Then we want to install the Gulp CLI as global, so -g tells me it's a global install, so I can use it also from other projects, not only from this one. And then the name of the package, which is Gulp CLI. And by the way, those instructions you usually find in the npm package site. And that's now just press OK here or enter, and it now installs the Gulp CLI for me. And with it I can later directly type Gulp commands here on my command line. You see down here it fetches a lot of stuff. So Gulp itself again has dependencies, so it's not just Gulp which is installed, but also the dependencies which Gulp's built on. And this usually takes some time, and as it is a global install, after it you don't need to do it again for other projects which you want to use Gulp in. So the next thing, we also need to install the Gulp package, so basically the libs, and those are basically dependencies for our project. So we want to import different libraries or different commands for Gulp, tasks and stuff, and those are in a separate package, and I install it with npm install again. But now I don't use -g. This is not a global install, that's an install now for our project here, but I want to use another specifier here which is save dev, which tells me that this is just a dev dependency. And then the name of the package is Gulp. Press OK, and this will now install Gulp, the Gulp library, as a dependency. Now that it's finished, Gulp also appears here in the package.json as a dev dependency. Now what is a dev dependency? It's basically a dependency you'll need during development. So for example, for Gulp, this is needed during the build. It's not a dependency which your code relies on. And that's an important distinction to make. If you want to publish an npm package yourself where you have dependencies, you have to decide what kind of dependencies are. So for example, the dev dependencies, if somebody else uses your npm package and installs it, your dev dependencies are not installed on his machine or in his project. But the real dependencies or direct dependencies, those are the ones which are also installed for him. And that's important because if you, for example, make calls to certain libs or certain JavaScript functions which come from other npm packages, those have to also be available for whoever uses your package. So that's why you place those as a normal dependency. But as I said, gulp here is just a dev dependency for me. Also, I don't plan to publish this, so this project is just my homepage and I use gulp and some other tools during the build, so it's all dev dependencies. And yeah, we can now continue. So the first thing you see here, it's just the dist folder. What we want to have is a source folder, so I create it, and in the source folder I'll place all the templates and yeah, also the CSS files which are non-minified, the JavaScript code which is non-minified, and later I'll use gulp and some plugins for gulp to transform it, transcode it and copy it into the dist. And for a start, for a first proof of concept, I'll just take one PHP and one HTML file from the dist. So let's just take here maybe the shop HTML and the index PHP, copy it and put it down here in the source. So I maintain the same structure for now. And if you remember my intro video, so the last video, I was talking about using Nunjucks template engine, and as a first proof of concept, my goal would be to check if it works for both HTML and PHP and just make a very simple test. But before I can do that, let's first create a simple gulp task which just copies those two up into the dist folder, just to get started and get used to gulp, and then later we can start using plugins like Nunjucks. But before we do that, let's quickly have a look here on the left side. You see up here the source control, or the Git, tells me now I have 3000 files now which have changed. And yeah, what does it mean? If we look now, here's a new folder which is node modules, and this contains all the dependencies of gulp. So you remember we installed this gulp as a dev dependency, but gulp, this package again, has dependencies, and those are now all installed here as node modules. What I don't want is to have them under version control. So I go to my git ignore here and add the node underscore modules as a ignore. And now you see it's also grayed out. And now I only have 5 changes. To use gulp, what we have to do is create a gulp file here in the root, gulp.js. And in this file, the first thing, we create a variable which we call gulp, and then we require the gulp npm package, basically the exports from the gulp npm package. And this gives us access to the functionality within the gulp library. And one of the things we need to do something with gulp, so gulp is a task-based system, so what we can do is gulp.task. So this defines a gulp task, and for now we'll use the default task. The default task lets you later just type gulp in the command line, and it will look for the default task within this gulp file and execute it. So we'll call our task here default, and then we'll define the callback function, which is called by that task. And for simplicity's sake, now just to check if it works, we'll make a console log. This is the default task, and see what happens now if we run gulp in the command line. Now you see the log here, but we also see an error down here, and this is because gulp doesn't know when this task is finished. So there are different ways to deal with that. So later when we do real tasks, this will be kind of a stream task which we define, and this automatically works correctly. But for such a simple function, gulp has to know when it's finished. And there's one way you can do it. Gulp passes in this callback function, which is called done, and we can just call it at the end of our function to solve this problem. So gulp now knows when we're done. Another thing which you could do is to make this function here return a promise. And you can simply do this by placing the async keyword before the function, which is the same as if you would return a promise from that function. And this also lets gulp know that it has to wait for this function. And now what we wanted to do is not just print something out on the console, we wanted to define a copy task for these two files here. And this can easily be done by defining a stream. And if I use a stream here within that function, I can also remove this async, so I no longer need to return a promise. So a stream is sufficient. And here, how do I create a stream? I do return gulp, and a stream, I want to access first the source folder. So gulp source creates a source stream, and within it I specify the folder from which I want to read the files. And for this we created our source folder down here. So I say source and I use all the files. Then with that stream I can pipe it, and then I can define tasks on it. That's basically how Gulp works. So you can start a stream by selecting a source folder, then do something to the files which are read from that source folder, and in the end you can save it. And this is just what we do by defining a dest, or let's do gulp dest, and here we specify the output folder, which is our dist folder. And I can just do dist here, and I think I don't need that slash either. And now I can run the task again, and yeah, it works, but we don't know if it really works. So what we can do, we go into this index.html and just edit it. For example, I just quickly do some change here, adding source. And now when I run it, I can look here at the changed files, and in the dist folder, now, since this is under version control, we now see that actually the source, or the index.php from the source, was copied over, because now we see this as a div here. And that's also why I set up my project like that. So I have the original homepage here in the dist, and now I work with the source, have gulp tasks defined, also then with templates and everything will be ending up here in this dist folder. And with Git, I can then check if what I do here with my build system is correct. Because what I actually want is, for most of the files, there shouldn't be much of a change. Also, when I later use the templates, it should look the same as before. And yeah, that's the ultimate goal. But for now, I think we've arrived at a stage where we can start with some more interesting tasks. So now looking into Nunjucks, I think for this video, it is enough. So let's quickly go through what we've done. So we've installed node npm, then we set up the npm project here to be able to install npm packages. We've installed the gulp CLI, which allows us to do something like this, gulp on the command line. Then we've installed as a dev dependency the gulp library, which we use within this gulp.js. So here we get access to the functions of the gulp library, and we're using this task and this source, which creates a stream. We pipe that stream directly into an output. But yeah, in the next video, we'll do something more in between here. But for now, hope you liked that video. If so, make sure to subscribe, leave a thumbs up, and yeah, see you in the next video.